to recover from. Good evening. Welcome to the Bulletin tonight. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matolet.
My name is John Alanamu, and tonight is Checkpoint. The two people behind us form part of the discussion tonight. Of course, we're discussing the teacher strike and the discussion around the numbers, not the politics, the numbers,
right?
Really, this time around.
That's true. I mean, I think, and we can walk to the wall for just a moment, because the teacher strike aside, but I think it has raised the issue once again of where we are with the public wage bill. So these are the two statements that you and I and all of us have been subjected to this past week. President Uhuru Kenyatta is saying the wage bill is at 568 billion, representing 52% of the tax revenue collection. Raila gives a different figure. He says, no, I was in the Grand Coalition government. We were there together. In fact, that's what he said in the piece he wrote today in the Sunday Standard. Yeah. We were in government together while he was Prime Minister at some point and he was Minister for Finance. Yeah. So he says they both know the figures. 370 billion is what he claims is the wage bill at 32% of, the money collected. So today, from all of this that you've heard, we will try and set the figures straight and get an understanding of where we are with the wage bill. Remember, the SRC, that's the Salaries and Remunerations Commission, had a national wage bill conference last year. They then went around the country seeking views on this and raising awareness on where we are with the wage bill in this country. So we'll be taking a look at what happened with that. Where are we with the numbers? Where are we losing money? Where do we need to cut back on? Some people say this whole issue and debate about the wage bill is a fallacy. Is it? Those are the questions we'll be answering. The hashtag is Checkpoint, so do get in touch with us on that.
All right, great questions. They're being asked this evening on Checkpoint. Remember to tune in and leave your feedback, of course, on the hashtag. But, of course, there's lots of other stories that we're covering from here and from the East African region. Good evening and hello, and thank you for joining us, by the way. These are the highlights on KTN Weekend Prime tonight.
Side to side as she comes towards the line. What a fabulous victory.
It's a double win for Kenya at the Berlin Marathon. And Kenyan public school teachers to defy back-to-school order. Also coming up, what it takes to impeach a president in Kenya.
Ahadi bwana kuhusu sijui maji, sijui barabara, sijui nini. Barabara ndo tumeiona iwapo, lakini kuhusu maji ni miaka mingi, yani ndo hivi yani.
Sidhani kama watatekeleza, ndo kama wanavyotupa ahadi, sifikirie hilo swala.
And the expectations of Tanzanians from their presidential candidates. William Silla is our sign language interpreter tonight. Welcome to the program. Great news for Kenya as Eliud Kipchoge and Gladys Cherono stamped Kenya's supremacy on the racetrack yet again. Kipchoge won the 2015 Berlin Marathon while Cherono scooped the first position in the women's race.
Yet another Kenyan, Eliud Kiptanui, took second position as Ethiopian Fayisa Lilesa followed in third. Great news for what has been a stellar year for Kenyan athletes, and great congratulations to all of the people who've been representing us and flying our flag high. But to some less than stellar news now, the government of Kenya has directed that all public schools reopen on Monday, but the teachers say they will not be in class in the morning. The court suspended the strike for 90 days to allow for negotiations.
The teachers, however, maintain that they will only return to class if and when the government honors the 50 to 60% pay rise as directed by the court. Sharon Mamanye reports.
It is not back to school yet, as striking teachers received fresh instructions Sunday to stay put and only receive instructions from the teachers' unions. In a statement to newsrooms, NAT Secretary General Wilson Sossion stated that the strike continues. This goes against the directive by the Employment and Labor Relations Court Friday for the two teachers' unions to suspend the strike for 90 days and give dialogue with the government a chance.
Ni vizuri wajali maslahi ya watoto wetu, watoto wa Kenya, kupata nafasi ya kuwasomesha. Kwa sababu hiyo, mimi ninaamini ya kwamba walimu watakuwa shuleni kesho.
The unions want TSC to withdraw the case it had filed in the Court of Appeal challenging the earlier court ruling on the teachers' pay rise. They say the strike will not end as long as the appeal case by TSC is still active in court.
Kama ni pesa ilipwe mara moja, alafu tujue watoto wako shule, sio kila mwaka mkomo.
Tunasema hii mambo ya project ya laptop inaweza ngojea mwaka ingine moja, tuchukue hiyo pesa tupatie nini? Walimu. Kwa sababu hakuna haja ya kununua laptop na walimu na watoto wako shule wa kutumia hizo laptop. Hapo namna gani?
Naomba walimu na naomba wasifanye vile president alifanya. I can't pay, I won't pay. Na naongea kwa mambo ya kotini.
Speaking at a Harambee in Bahati PCA Church in Nairobi, Deputy President William Ruto rubbished the move by CORD leaders to raise money to support teachers.
Hiyo Harambee nasikia, nilikuwa nauliza Kidero hapa kama amesikia mahali hiyo Harambee imefika. Ati sasa wako na shilingi 1,120. Na ile pesa inatafutwa ni bilioni 118. Surely. Maajabu ya Musa hii.
CORD haikuwa ina pretend kwamba tunaweza kuchanga pesa za kulipa walimu. La. That was not even the intention. Mwenye kulipa walimu ni serikali ya Kenya through the Teachers Service Commission.
The teachers' strike has gone on for a month now, with the government defying 2 court orders directing it to implement the teachers' pay rise. The teachers are also now defying the court order to suspend the strike, adding to the push and pull between the 2 conflicting parties. The courts, which have been playing the arbitration, are increasingly getting undermined, further complicating the case. Sharon Momanyi, KTN News.
The Kenyan government now says that voluntary early retirement is a solution to the bloated public wage bill. The chair of the Public Service Commission, Professor Margaret Kobia, says the government will launch a capacity assessment and rationalization exercise targeting 26,000 civil servants.
The spotlight over the country's ballooning wage bill shone brightly after the head of state himself admitted to the country that the problem was such a menace that it deprived the government of sufficient funds to pay striking teachers.
Kenya shillings 568 billion went to pay our wages, meaning that 1.5% of our population consumed 52% of all taxes raised.
To access these.
And the Public Service Commission has now come out to say that the process of employee auditing is being enhanced to have about 26,000 employees axed through a voluntary early retirement application program.
In the public service, people work under certain terms and conditions of service. Therefore, we cannot really separate people without taking the due process.
The exercise, the Commission believes, is a step towards the right direction in solving the bloated wage bill issue. But the chair of the Public Service Commission insists that no one will be shown the door forcefully.
I want to assure all the public servants that retrenchment is not in the mind of Public Service Commission. In fact, I see an opportunity where we will need now to hire more in a strategic manner.
This directive comes just 3 weeks after Treasury CS Henry Rotich and Central Bank Governor Patrick Njoroge wrote to the IMF over the wage bill issue. In the letter, they both offer government's commitment in ensuring that staff rationalization is enhanced to solve the problem. The letter dated 31st August states, among other things, that the freeze on hiring new staff will continue except for exceptional services such as security, health, and education. Kenya's total wage bill, including ministries, commissions, and independent constitutional offices, is estimated at 568 billion shillings, which translates to 11% of the gross domestic product, compared to the global best practice of 7%. Members of the civil service targeted for the axe are mostly seen as those who were absorbed into the public service from the municipal councils when the devolved system of government came into play. Timothy Otieno, KTN News.
So the government's considering an employment freeze, among other things, to be able to tame what it says is a wage bill that is out of control. Is it? Let's look at the numbers now, Yvonne, and let's get some answers, because There have been numbers thrown around this entire week.
That's right.
Yeah, what are you saying?
All right. So we'll take a look at all those numbers that we've had. And of course, we will get the answers to this in our discussion later. But we just want to set the stage for what you have seen across the week. This was the figure we showed you in the beginning, what each of these two leaders is saying. But let's get into the details of it and see where they're getting their numbers and some of their statistics. So let's look at the president's numbers. In that statement, and you've seen bits of it, that was delivered last week. Actually, it's a week ago now. He said the wage bill is at 568 billion, taking up 52% of tax revenue. Now, all of this is going to around 680,000 public officers who form 1.5% of the population. So essentially saying that the taxes that are being paid by more than 40 million Kenyans is going towards 52% of the tax revenues towards this 568. So later on, Manoa Sipiso, of course, gave a rebuttal to that article that was done by Alphonse Shundu, one of our writers here, saying, listen, and the 48% of tax revenues goes to the following: servicing our debts, provision of essential services, development programs, operations and maintenance, and saying the government also borrows to complement development programs. Now, where did Raila get his figures from? If you read the Sunday Standard today, he had a full-page article talking about that. Now, he says, look, I was in the government before, and this is what I know are the numbers. And he's getting his figures from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics report. And this is what he's saying. The wage bill is 370 billion. How does he arrive at that figure? He says, well, the national government will be spending 85 billion shillings. The teachers will be taking 145 billion shillings. 62 billion shillings goes to the counties for their remunerations, and parastatals take up 77 billion shillings. Another question that Raila Odinga raises is the fact that he says that the money that was budgeted for wages in this financial year is 329 billion. So his argument is, if the country is setting aside 329 billion shillings to pay salaries, then where is the figure of 568 billion coming from? Saying that in fact then it looks like the wage bill has gone down. So those are some of the arguments that are being made. But there's a backdrop to all of these. Please remember, there's a couple of issues that remain outstanding. Let's not forget the Auditor General's report that was released a few months ago, talking about the fact that 67 billion shillings was not lost, but cannot be accounted for. In the contentious Education Ministry, if you remember, that figure was about 12.8 billion shillings. Then also, let's not forget that parastatals are using up about 76.9 billion shillings. Companies with majority government shareholding are using up about 48 billion shillings for their wages. And parastatals were meant to be reformed in the last 2 years. Yes, they were either to be abolished, to be merged, so as to make them more efficient and to, in fact, give us more money than they're actually spending on recurrent expenditure. This also comes on the back of that cabinet ministerial statement that talked about 12,000 ghost workers that exist within the civil service. Now, these 12,000 ghost workers are spending 70 million shillings a month. That comes to about 1.8 billion shillings a year. Where are we losing money? What is the state of the wage bill? We'll be taking a look at these figures. We have the CEO of the Salaries and Remunerations Commission, Ann Gitao. We also have the CEO of the Institute for Economic Affairs, that's Kwame Owino. So those are the numbers, so that we just put the conversation in context. That's what you've been subjected to. What is the real state of it? Where are we getting our money from? Are we borrowing most of our expenditure in the country?
Yeah.
And then, where are we losing money? Is the wage bill something serious? Because, of course, the teachers' strike aside, it raises a big issue about how much we're spending on recurrent expenditure.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah, and in terms of prioritization, I think that's something that we also need to be able to talk about. Also, what our debt portfolio looks like.
That's right.
Over the past few years, it's risen quite a bit, including things like the Eurobond. How does that affect our position as a country right now? And how much are you and I paying for
And
for
don't
all
forget,
of this?
infrastructural expenditure. We're
Yeah.
going big on a number of big infrastructure projects. The SGR, the Standard Gauge Railway, is one of them. We have the Lapset project. We have all of these that continue to demand a lot of money. If you talk about what happens with the dollar, that's where apparently all our dollars are going to,
Yeah.
because we're spending a lot of money on buying the implements and materials for this big infrastructure projects. So talking about, you know, the dollar being in high demand, low supply. So all of these issues, where are we with that? And why is this an important conversation? Is it an important conversation? Remember, Court is saying this whole argument about the wage bill, fallacious. but we'll see what happens with our analysts. Hashtag Checkpoint for any questions and comments on this issue at KTN News, at Yvonne Okwara, and at John Allen Namo.
All right, let's get on with some more news before we get to that conversation. The ongoing teachers' strike has opened a new battlefront between the government of Kenya and the opposition. The Coalition for Reforms and Democracy, CORD, last week announced that it will institute impeachment proceedings against President Uhuru Kenyatta for allegedly violating the constitution by failing to pay teachers following a court order. But what does it take to remove a Kenyan president from office? And does CORD have what it takes to make history?
The president will now...
The 2010 promulgation of the new constitution opened a new chapter for Kenya on many fronts, from devolution to a bicameral legislature. Analysts say the implementation of the constitution is well on course, albeit amid a few hitches. But some provisions of the supreme law have remained uncharted territory until now.
We as a coalition have instructed our team in the National Assembly to immediately start instituting impeachment proceedings against the President of the Republic of Kenya.
Those who are proposing the impeachment of the President, that proposal of impeachment of the President is as ridiculous as the proposal that we are going to sort out the teachers' problem by having a harambe. Ati wale wanasema wana propose impeachment, ndio wale wanasema ati tutafanya harambe ya kukusanya pesa bilioni 118 ya kulipa walimu. Hata kama kweli wewe uko na kichwa timamu, hiyo maneno inawezekana?
Removal of a president by impeachment is provided for under Article 145 of the Constitution of Kenya. It sets out 3 grounds over which a president can be impeached: gross violation of a provision of the Constitution or any other law, where there are serious reasons for believing that the president has committed a crime under national law, or for gross misconduct. The opposition Coalition for Reforms and Democracy believes there are grounds to impeach President Uhuru Kenyatta
for violating the Constitution of the Republic that he swore to protect, to defend, and to uphold.
The CORD impeachment plot is led by Suba MP John Mbadi.
The motion for it to be tabled, it has to get the support of 1/3 of the members of the National Assembly. We have about 349 members of the National Assembly, so that works out to about 117 members who must sign the motion in support of the impeachment.
Or a legitimate expectation.
With 136 CORD members in the National Assembly, impeachment step number 1, that of moving the motion, may be an easy sell for CORD. But that may be all the smooth ride the coalition will get in their impeachment journey. For the motion to sail through the House, it requires a 2/3 majority,
which is about 233 or 34 members of the National Assembly. The motion will be said to have passed. And from then, the Constitution says the Speaker of the National Assembly has to notify the Speaker of the Senate within 2 days of that motion and forward the motion to him.
Within 7 days of receiving the notice of resolution from the Speaker of the National Assembly, the Senate will convene to hear the charges against the President. All this while, the President will continue to perform his presidential duties. The Senate, by resolution, may appoint an 11-member committee to investigate the matter, and the President will have the right to appear before the special committee during its investigations. The committee is required to report its findings to the Senate within 10 days.
Even forgetting about the 2/3 in the National Assembly, we have 11 people who are extremely powerful in that process.
If the committee finds that there are grounds for the impeachment of the President, the Senate will offer the President an opportunity to be heard before voting on the impeachment charges. If a 2/3 majority of senators vote in favor of the impeachment motion, the President shall cease to hold office, and the Deputy President will take over as President for the remainder of the term. And even then, the presidential term limit would apply.
If, for instance, that were to happen today, Deputy President Ruto, if the time remaining is more than 2.5 years or more, we will be taken to have served 1 term, so that if he were to run for election next time, he can only run once. Then we will be counted as having served the 2 full terms under the Constitution.
Impeachment is no doubt an elaborate process compared to the vote of no confidence motion provision that was in place before the new constitution came into force. In 1998, James Orengo, then a controversial Ford Kenya MP, moved a motion of no confidence against the then President Daniel Moi over the poor state of the economy and a deteriorating security situation. With the ruling party KANU having a majority in the House, the motion flopped. Only 67 MPs voted for it. 137 voted against it. With a Jubilee majority in the House, the code impeachment motion, some analysts say, may not see the light of day.
The political scenario in the country looks a little bit bleak for such a motion because we have always observed that because Jubilee controls the House, it is almost impossible to move any motion that is against the executive.
For now, though, CORD is not paying any attention to the odds against it, with insiders saying the coalition is lobbying non-CORD MPs to support the motion. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
Tanzanians now have only 27 days to go before they go to the polls to elect their next president. And one of the things they want the presidential candidates to address is the provision of clean water. An opinion by survey company Toweza East Africa indicates that almost half of Tanzanians think provision of safe drinking water is one of the biggest challenges facing the government. Our reporter Francis Ontomwa spent the day with some of the citizens in Tanzania and now brings us their story.
Mid-morning at Chanika area on the outskirts of Dar es Salaam city, Zainab Kitwana, a mother of two, makes her way to this community's only water point. Roughly, she has covered 3 kilometers to reach here. She's not the only one, and therefore she queues up. Statistics by WaterAid, a non-governmental body, shows that over 14 million people in Tanzania do not have access to safe water, while about 7,000 children die every year from diarrhea and general poor sanitation.
Mimi kutoka hapa kuchota maji, natoka hapa mpaka Sikusia. Sikusia ndo nimechota maji ndo nimeweka na jisikia kizunguzungu ndo nakuja sasa hivi ndo nakuja.
Zainab, like many other women in our village, have to endure this kind of life on a daily basis. And with the country deep in the election mood, she knows too well that it will feature prominently on the campaign promises. The Toweza survey indicates that nearly 9 out of 10 citizens have no faith in the promises made by politicians.
Shida nyingi mara naamka saa 11 au saa 10 saa 9 ndo naamka mie mpaka nipate maji. Kama hivyo upati maji hivi. Na ukija mapema utagombana na watu. Maneno, ngumi. Ndo maana naamka saa 10 au saa 9.
The problem of water is one of Tanzania's top concerns, at least according to recent opinion surveys. For instance, this is Chanika village's only water point, and it serves about 10,000 people. And worryingly enough, it's drying up. The city of Dar es Salaam and Morogoro town have already recorded about 5 deaths from cholera outbreak in recent times.
Kusumaja ndo mtihani mpaka tunakunywa maji ya chumvi sometime nini. Kupika unapika maji ya chumvi.
The survey, conducted between 19th August and September 7th this year, augments the fact that water supply tagged along health and education as top 3 concerns to the citizens.
Bwana kuhusu hii ahadi naona walitoa ahadi bwana kuhusu sijui maji, sijui barabara, sijui nini. Barabara ndo tumeiona iwapo, lakini kuhusu maji ni miaka mingi yani ndo hivi yani.
Mimi sidhani, sifikiri kwa sababu lisali limeahidiwa muda mrefu sana, lakini ndo kama hivyo unavyoona. Lakini sidhani kama watatekeleza, ndo kama wanavyotupa ahadi, sifikiri hilo swala.
And from the foregoing mood in the country, it is clear that the October 25th showdown will not only be a stage to muscle for power, but also a platform to objectively assess the real issues. Francis Ontomwa, KTN News, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Well, global access to clean water and sanitation is part of the Sustainable Development Goals that were passed recently, and Kenya spearheaded the approval of those Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. Kenya co-chaired the intergovernmental process that led to the formulation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. After a special session of the UN summit, President Uhuru Kenyatta spoke to KTN News' Sophia Wanuna, and here's part of that interview.
In the SDGs, we have gender making it there. Women, even going by the Jubilee Manifesto, is a close issue to you. You're co-chairing one of the meetings on that. However, talk to us about how we protect the gains, because back home we're seeing the not more than 2/3 gender rule, full implementation pushed to 1 year because we're not quite there yet.
We are continuing as a government to putting women on the center stage. We as the executive have done, for the first time in the history of Kenya, achieve the objective of having at least 1/3 of women in our administration. 1/3 of the people in our administration are actually women, and we've gone out of our way to ensure that they are not holding just menial positions. Defense, for the first time in the history of Kenya, is a position held by a woman. Foreign affairs, position held by a woman. Devolution, which is a major portfolio, held by a woman. Tourism, another senior portfolio, held by a woman. Environment, held by a woman. And I think Kenyans are saying for themselves that these are people who are doing a good and great job. And yes, we may not be where we want to be, but the strides that we are making are quite impressive. As a government, we have put in play, again for the first time, the 30% procurement for women, youth, and persons with disability, again trying to enhance the role that women play in development. Acknowledging that by leaving women and our young people out, you're basically leaving the majority of the population from the center of the developmental agenda. And we are doing everything we can to mainstream gender and to ensure that all able Kenyans are able to play their role in the development and growth of our country.
Again, youth, a subject close to your heart. You've talked a lot about this even in your speech to the Assembly. And one of the targets is increase the number of youth with relevant skills in national building. In Kenya, for example, we have the National Youth Service. And a lot of the times, however, despite the gains we have seen, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of politicking about it.
We have seen a lot of success actually coming from it. We have seen crime rates fall in inner cities as a result of this program. We have seen young people begin to establish themselves in business as a result of this program and become self-employed and actually gone on to become employers themselves. So the focus on young people is something that we will not give up on. And I call upon all of us to recognize that. Let us work together to overcome whatever challenges there are.
And KTN News' special correspondent Alex Chamwada will be joining us shortly from New York to explain the implications of the adoption of the SDGs. I'm told now we have him live. Alex, if you can hear me, thank you very much for joining us from New York. It's been a momentous conference and that General Assembly, of course, with the adoption of the SDGs. But how different are they from the Millennium Development Goals that were adopted 15 years ago?
Now, one of the issues is the Millennium Development Goals were targeting specific countries, or rather countries had their own targets. But these Sustainable Development Goals now, it's about the whole world speaking one voice. And for instance, that may have been met in specific countries. For example, the poor people reducing. But even those who have remained, the small fraction that has remained, they're even much poorer. And then the Sustainable Development Goals are aimed at reducing the gaps between, not just within countries, but also among, for example, countries now, say, life expectancy at birth or the line. Or the people living below the poverty line. So the intention is to reduce those gaps with the world speaking in one voice with the aim of trying to make countries have similar goals at the same time now.
All right, Alex, as you continue, we just need to apologize for the quality of the signal there. The broadband connection isn't very good, but nonetheless, let's carry on. Alex, that's all well and good with respect to the SDGs, but how enforceable is this now that if it's adopted at the United Nations level, how enforceable is it down here in Kenya, in Nairobi, in different parts of the country?
Well, I mean, to reduce corruption or eradicate corruption across the world and even within countries, so to speak. For example, you had even when President Obama was in Kenya, he said that the poverty levels within Kenya are different. I mean, a child in, say, Western or Nyanza region is likely to die from diseases that can be controlled as compared to a child in other parts of the country. You've seen education in Turkana is different from education in Nairobi, but it's just that the world leaders have come here to dedicate their efforts to make sure that they are speaking with one voice, so that even if it's just about Kenya, what are other countries doing about this? How can the countries communicate among themselves in order to eradicate poverty? So the targets are really getting the world to speak together.
All right, some of those SDGs include better access to cleaner sources of energy, better quality education. All of these are very high-sounding goals that we have, but how do you fund them? What kind of partnerships are being discussed in New York to talk about the funding structure for the SDGs?
For example, in clean energy, I mean, how can countries share technology? Like in the developed world, they have better strategies in terms of energy. Countries like Norway, as we've discussed before, have innovative ways of even turning waste into biogas that is used to run public buses. So such technology, if it's transferred across nations and the receiving countries put in more commitments, then you could find the targets are being met. So it's about even sharing technologies, sharing ideas. But again, as you heard from the speech by Pope Francis during the opening session, there are certain factors that may hinder the attainment of those goals. For example, corruption is a key problem. Leadership, leaders have been talking about, like negative ethnicity, human rights, abuse of power. All those, if they are not tackled, then some of the leaders who are here are saying they may just be talking among themselves and those goals may not be attained.
Alex, Pope Francis in his address talked about the negative effects or the negative effects accruing from extractive industries around the world, where a country or a corporation would come into a country and mine those minerals from that country, and yet the countries do not benefit from those kinds of things. What kind of specific policies are going to be implemented from the UN level to ensure that equality gaps are addressed by these SDGs in a more effective way than perhaps the MDGs did?
Well, those are some of the issues they'll be now going into. President Barack Obama is expected to address the Assembly in less than an hour's time. So there are more sessions now to iron out some of those. We are not clear yet about the strategies they would like to use in order to achieve those goals. But at the end of this week, probably now we'll be able to know how do they now strategize, or what's the agreement in terms of bringing those balances. As you've rightly said, some of the industrialized countries, I mean, their policies are done in a manner that negatively on the developing world. So we will be monitoring to hear that, but yet up to now they've not come up with the strategies yet on how to counter those imbalances.
All right, finally, Alex, before I let you go, there is the existential threat of terrorism that faces countries around the world. And Western states and the Middle East are facing the IS. We're facing the Al-Shabaab here. What kind of conversations are going on around being able to address security challenges as one global community, especially the threat of terrorism, Alex?
Well, one strategy is to efforts towards pumping resources in what is called the target areas. Tomorrow there will be a session on the issue of Somalia. To begin with reviewing what has been done so far. So they would want a certain problem as a problem that affects the whole. that it's not just a problem, for example, if it's Al-Shabaab in Kenya, it's not just a Kenya issue. Effect, it has a ripple effect onto the other the world. So there are certain sessions beginning with Somalia tomorrow, where they'll now be going into the nitty-gritties of the various regions that are affected and how to pull resources together in order to counter that.
All right, Alex Chamwada, thank you very much for joining us. Alex Chamwada is, of course, our special correspondent, joining us live from New York at the United Nations General Assembly, where that is ushering in a new era in terms of sustainable development, that having come to pass after 15 years of the Millennium Development Goals having expired in September this year. We will keep you updated with what's going on with that address by US President Barack Obama to the General Assembly, and what accrues to us as an African state and a member of the global community.
That's right. Important questions you asked about funding. Where is that going to come from? And of course, talking about more sustainable funding. So less development, less dependency rather on donor funding. I remember that was a big issue when we went to Addis to just cover the funding for development conference. So interesting outcomes from there. We'll continue to keep you updated. Sophia Wanuna is there. So is Alex Chamwada. So do stay with us. Meanwhile, what do the numbers tell us? Where are we with the wage bill? How are we funding our own government's operations? How are we funding salaries? Are we spending all our money on salaries? Where are we with the wage bill?
A conversation that you need to pay attention to, so get out your notebooks and check the facts yourselves as you listen to the conversation. That's coming up right after the break. The hashtag is Checkpoint here on KTN Weekend Prime on KTN News, where you get the whole story. Back in a moment.
Welcome to Checkpoint. Please use the hashtag Checkpoint on social media so we can track your feedback. You can use the handles at KTN News, at Yvonne Okwara, and at John Alanamo. If you prefer to send us a text message, please go ahead. The number is 22155. It is absolutely free as we continue to interrogate the issues of the wage bill. This sometimes great big monster that rears its head every time we want a little bit more money. Let me introduce you to my guests on the show. Today we have Anne Gitau, who's the CEO of the Salaries and Remunerations Commission. Thanks for coming. We also have Kwame Owino, who's the CEO of the Institute for Economic Affairs. Thank you both for making the time. We've been bombarded with figures all week and everybody having a different interpretation. And all of them seem to make compelling arguments that, you know, sort of fit their case. How is it, and we'll come to you to set the record straight, Anne, in a moment, but Kwame, how is it that we can have such disparate figures in the country at this time? Each is claiming to quote a very credible source from the National Bureau of Statistics. This is what was allocated in the budget. Some of us, the president really is in government and is on top of the figures, or so we're led to believe, and then we have different figures. Talk to us about this huge disparity that we're seeing.
Well, I think what the disparity tells you is the state of transparency in public finances in Kenya. And for that, the executive and parliament must take responsibility, and specifically the executive. Because the executive believes that it only discloses what favors it. So when it is convenient, then it brings together numbers which nobody can interrogate line by line to actually qualify. So that's basically the point. But maybe you'll come back to it later. So partial disclosures are part of the reason that we have an underestimate by the majority leaders, and what is supposed to be full disclosure is what is leading to the other figure of 500 billion. So basically in between that is a question of what is actually disclosed to the Kenyan public. And you can tell very right off the bat at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we could tell that the figures that were cited by Honorable Raila Odinga are actually far too low. And there are certain things that reach you right away that were not included. For instance, KDF. There's a belief out there that KDF figures and how they spend is supposed to be kept secret. I don't believe that is so. The constitution doesn't allow it, and I don't also believe that it makes us safe. Many countries that are very transparent and also very competent militaries actually disclose those figures, even if not to parliamentary committees, but also to the public. So basically, it's a question of disclosures. Yes.
All right. So okay. Yeah. Well, that's the answer we'll get for now, and we'll get into more of the details as we go. And what is the position with the wage bill? We had the National Wage Bill Conference last year. You went around the country. But we only seem to see this issue of the National Wage Bill rear its head when one sector of the economy says, oh, we want more money, and then we remember, oh, wait, but we have a wage bill that is out of control. So what is the status of that? And perhaps you can talk to us about the outcome of going around the country last year.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for having me here. When the Constitution was promulgated, the Commission took office in 2012. When they took office, they interrogated the statistics that were on the ground. One of the things that they realized was that the wage bill was unsustainable. And the Commission came up with 2 objectives. Number 1, sensitize the entire public service about the state of the wage bill. Number 2, come up with a sustainable way of managing the wage bill. So yes, after sensitizing everyone, we sat back and asked ourselves, how do we come up with a sustainable way? And the thing that we did was to come up with a remuneration and benefit policy. That policy was launched by His Excellency on 5th of July. Within that policy, we have quick wins and we have long-term objectives. One of the quick wins that we have taken to run with the country is a job evaluation for the rest of the public service. We are in it right now, and we believe that the job evaluation that we are conducting, like any other job evaluation, will give us a rationalized, competitive, and harmonized remuneration structure. Within that remuneration structure, as a commission, we believe that every public service remuneration should be based on that grading structure. And we are appealing to everybody to support the commission in its mandate so that we can bring sanity within the wage bill that is quite unsustainable right now.
Okay, unsustainable right now. Some say bake a bigger cake. Let's make a bigger pie that is then enough for everybody and their needs. Kwame, what should be the rationale here? Should we be saying, let's make more money, this is how? But there's also the thing about cutting back on wastage, and there's certain areas, and we've had you here on several occasions, and we're talking about even the Auditor's General report, not saying money was lost, but even how it was spent and priorities and accounting for that money. For example, in the education sector, it was 12.8 billion shillings that could not be accounted for.
Can I get back to the figures because we're talking about 370 and 568. Between them is almost 200 billion difference.
Yes.
Now that's big.
Yeah.
Our view at the Institute of Economic Affairs, we sat back after Thursday and tried to bring together this. And the first thing you realize, there are really gaping holes about what government pays for in terms of wages. For instance, KDF. The prisons were not included in what is there. So when you take all these quote-unquote security officers and all those other things, it's not even clear even with the NYS how much of that actually goes to wages, which everybody lauds as a very good program. I don't know whether it is. I actually suspect it is not, because we found out 700 million is missing. Our figures, we've tried very conservative estimates, actually bring us close to about 47%. Now, if the president can disclose everything else, maybe we can cover that gap.
Right.
But it is clear that the figures, and I say this with respect, the figures that were cited by Honorable Raila Odinga are far too low.
Okay.
But they are based on only the declared amounts. There are lots of salaries that government pays for as wages, including some that are paid for in profit-making institutions. So obviously, you'll have to net off some things, but it is actually true. That the president's figures are actually closer than.
Okay, but this is what you're talking about in terms of full disclosure.
Precisely. So it's a disclosure. Part of it is actually a disclosure problem, which the president himself, if he wishes to have galvanized the public to support this, would have to do. So this idea, including the KDF bill, which says that we cannot disclose how we spend money in the KDF,
National
it does not make Kenya
issues.
safer, but it leads to Kenyans not believing everything government says. So that's part of it. But coming back to wastage, there's wastage in government. That's true. I mean, we just found out about the NYS. It's a program I don't like, so if I cite it too many times, forgive me.
Right.
700 million shillings just getting lost. It's not only NYS. There are all number of public programs out there that lose and leak a lot of money. People, as the Auditor General shows, people who actually are paid without supplying services of any kind. So there's definitely a lot of it. So yes, we can cut. However, I fear that we may not be able to cut sufficient money to be able to pay for this. And then it connects back to the fact that if you're already paying for those wages, it affects how much growth we can have in order to close the gap.
Right.
So already we'd be going into debt. And that's why I think these discussions requires us to be a little bit less confident ourselves and less of a commanding thing about won't pay, and we won't go back to school. I think it requires some kind of closing.
Okay.
But the way to start it with the full disclosures about who government is paying salaries for, including in the Teacher Service Commission. I doubt it that all the money that goes into the Teacher Service Commission just pays for teachers. But that's another discussion that the Salaries and Remuneration Commission could have with them quietly. But I doubt some of those numbers that are cited from the Teacher Service Commission.
Okay, and so what do we need to do? what are those levels that the SRC will be happy with and say? We know of the global figure of salaries and wages being 35% of the money that is collected. So what do we need to do to get ourselves as close to that figure as possible? Because I think when we hear the SRC, it's raising alarm. We're not doing well, we're not doing well. So what do we need to do to get us to where we want to be?
Okay, 3 quick things, Yvonne. Number 1, wages are directly related to the numbers. And as long as the numbers are increasing without looking at the wages, then we've got a problem there. So I think the first thing we need to do as a country is to look at institutions that handle each other, the numbers and the wage bill. If you're handling numbers, then work with SRC and get to see whether we can be able to have optimal numbers for the wage bill that we have, because as long as numbers increase, even if you want to work with the wage bill, we cannot be able to release it. We need to talk out to each other. If you're dealing with wages and numbers, talk to each other, both at the national and the county government. But the other thing that comes to my mind is productivity. Because as we speak today, productivity in Kenya is below 30%. And if we want to increase revenue so that you can handle wage bill, then we need to increase productivity. Productivity is one of the principles of the commission. And even as we are working on the job evaluation, our next big job is productivity. Because unless we are productive, we cannot make money and we cannot be able to pay. And as we are doing that, we are looking at the other principle of the commission, which is attraction and retention. Currently, Yvonne, government is becoming an employer, and government should never be an employer. We are saying that government and people in public service should offer goods and services, to motivate the corporate world so that the corporate world can make money for the purposes of the economy. So we need to look at numbers. We need to enhance our productivity. We need to move away from making government too attractive at the expense of the corporate world, because we need to attract labor, both within the country and externally. Right now, we are not doing very well in the labor market of Kenya. It's an expensive labor market. We need to think about that.
Right. Let's talk about wastage and where this money is going through, because sometimes it seems like we have a sieve and all of this money is coming through and it's just, being lost. So let's talk about that and what you think that can contribute towards bringing the wage bill down.
Thank you again. No institution can do it on its own. I want to believe that we want to work with Auditor General. We should work with the EACC, the Anti-Corruption Authority. We need to work as a team, because if we work in silos, the commission will go screaming about the wage bill. But if we work in silos without dealing with other institutions, then we'll not go anywhere. I believe that the country needs to have a debate within all the institutions that are relevant. Because as long as we have
wastage... Allow me to stop you there, because that's what the wage bill conference was about last year. You had all of these stakeholders, you had all government agencies, you had private sector, you had the corporates coming in, and now you're saying we should be. Did that not happen last year? Is that not happening right now?
Yvonne, I think it's a culture change within ourselves, because it's got to begin with you as a person who works in the public service to ask yourself what you want to do. We can talk about all these things, but as long as the culture that we have is not a culture of moving to where we want to be, then we'll really not get there. We have policies in place, we have strategies in place, but as Kenyans, we need to wake up as public service and believe in it and just do it.
With all due respect to my question, is there cooperation happening now between SRC and these other bodies, or not? At what level of cooperation would you say you are? What more needs to be done?
Thank you. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Yes, there is cooperation, but I believe we need to do more.
Okay. In a business world, Kwame, when you have figures such as these and we're spending all of this money and we're losing money and we're spending more on salaries than the other, then management that's where the buck stops. Yeah. And in a country setting, many would say, well, look, it is the government that is not managing its finances well and has failed. Some would say maybe it's a strong term or not. So how did we get to this? And who's the one who's supposed to fix this problem of 52% of our tax revenue going towards paying wages? In this management structure that is Kenya, where does the buck stop? Who makes the decisions that then set us on the right path?
It goes back to government. And my view, government is 3 arms of government. One is the executive, which definitely executes the budget and makes the budget proposals, obviously. And remember that Kenya's executive consumes almost 70% of all our total spending. So most of that is there. And if you look at it, actually, we tend to blame counties, but that's not true. Most of the new money is sucked into the executive branch of government. And that's where that's where the responsibility lies. The second one is Parliament. Parliament has been reluctant to cut budgets that are necessary. For instance, there are very many institutions that have actually misused public money, and the Auditor General has found it, but Parliament nevertheless gives them more money every year. So it looks like Parliament is not prepared to draw a line, whether out of fear or whether out of their own fealty with, as a majority party, with the executive is a different matter. So I think a different approach from Parliament, especially the committees on Parliamentary Accounts Committee and Parliamentary Investments Committee and all the other committees would actually be useful to set this up. So I find it interesting that Parliament is today trying to blame the executive, and yet they knew that the case was in court. I mean, the teachers are their constituents, that the executive did not make any contingency plans. When these budgets were being calculated, and as they were cutting off the budgets of the judiciary and other arms of government, why didn't they speak about this? So the responsibility, yes, the executive, certainly, because most of the wage bills have actually been, that have been going up is because of the executive. Yeah. But Parliament as well failed to ask the right questions about whether this sustainability is. And Parliament can tomorrow demand, or rather they open on Tuesday, could demand to have full disclosures about who is being paid, right up to the individual. Who is being paid and how much are they being paid, to ensure that that gap that we have, the 200 billion gap, that the president speaks about on one side and the leader of the minority party speaks about on one side, can actually be breached. Because if we don't do that, we are definitely in dangerous grounds, because it tells us that 200 billion could just disappear in Kenya and we do not know where it's going to.
And we would not know where it's going to, yes. A very scary scenario when you think about it. But let's talk about numbers, because Anne, you've been talking about that for quite a while. We know that there's 12,000 ghost workers, and that was from the biometric registration that was done, you know, within the civil service. That's costing the country a little over R1 billion a year. And now we're hearing today from the Public Service Commission that they're considering voluntary early retirement. Okay, that's on one end. What do we do about 12,000 ghost workers who do nothing for the government and who get paid? Talk to us about reforming the civil service, and whether, of course, the big one is retrenchment. And every time we talk about restructuring, we're going to say, oh, there's going to be no retrenchment. But surely, can we continue with things the way they are when you have 12,000 people on the payroll who do nothing for government?
All right, I would be hesitant to talk about the retrenchment because that's a purview of the Public Service Commission. However, as I've mentioned earlier, we need optimal numbers, and optimal numbers mean the numbers that can work and give the public service what we are looking for in terms of goods and services. So, to me, numbers directly relate to the wage bill. In terms of the retrenchment and the, you know, the bloated numbers, really that would not be our mandate because it's a Public Service Commission. All right,
but we do recognize that we have all of these ghost workers. How do we make sure that this doesn't happen in future? Just very quickly, because we're going to take a break now.
Yeah, because public service, the entire public service is working on something called the Capacity Assessment and Rationalization Program, and that's called CAPS, you know, as a synonym. And SRC is a member of CAPS. Many other institutions are members of CAPS, whether it is a TA, Transition Authority, Council of Governors, across the board. That's why we are working together, you know, looking at a multifaceted approach to be able to work on the numbers. I believe the County Government Act came up with the entire program of CAPS as part of the thing that must be done so that we can be able to have rational numbers at the national and the county government. And I'm saying this because at the county government right now, we have 3 salary structures. We have the structure of the secondary staff, we have the structure of people who have been employed by the county government, and you have the former local authority workers. Right. So we need to rationalize the numbers at the county and at the national government, and we can be able to have an optimal structure, grading structure, where we shall have our people, human resources, appended to.
Okay, all right. We're speaking with Anne Gitau, who's the CEO of the Salaries and Remunerations Commission here in Kenya, as well as Kwame Wino, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of Economic Affairs, that's IEA. Please do keep your feedback coming in. We want to take a short break. Hashtag Checkpoint, SMS number 22155. I'm seeing lots of your text messages. Nimeli Ngere from Webuye, I see your text message. We'll be getting into your feedback right after the break, so stay with us. You're watching Checkpoint on KTN Weekend Prime.